When you look at Batman's adversaries, one of his more brutal ones he has fought over the years has been Bane, a highly intelligent, muscle-bound criminal who enhances his physical strength with a super steroid known as Venom, while a lot of other Batman rogues carry with them some form of psychological or emotional baggage, vulnerabilities in many ways. Bane doesn't really have that. One word I have never associated with him is vulnerable. He always feels in control, one step ahead, unrelenting in every way. When Bane debuted in comics, within the Knightfall story arc, he made a splash on a splash page, breaking Batman's back over his knee in a moment as synonymous with the Dark Knight as the crucifixion is to Jesus Christ at this point. Batman Knightfall and the overarching Knightfall Saga depicts a hero being ripped apart, mentally and physically, piece by agonizing piece, before being snapped in half entirely. It shows a fall from grace by a would-be hero, influenced by a dark and mysterious force, and it has a legend return to reclaim his title and cement his status as one of the greatest of all time. The Knightfall Saga carries a lot of significance with me, as not only one of my favorite Batman storylines, but the first comic book storyline in general I had ever read from start to finish. I had bought one of the collected editions of it back in high school as a way to get into comics officially, something I had only slightly dabbled in here and there as a child. Knightfall has been a story I've wanted to discuss on my channel ever since I started doing these long-form comic book reviews, but just never got around to making for one reason or another. Most likely, it was because I felt a little intimidated by its sheer scale. Knightfall is a pretty long storyline that was released over the span of 16 months, from April of 1993 until August of 1994. The saga consists of 3 separate arcs: Knightfall, Night Quest, and Night's End, and when you factor in the prelude and aftermath on top of it, you're looking at around 70 issues in total, encompassing Detective Comics, Batman, Batman Shadow of the Bat, Batman Legends of the Dark Knight, Robin, DC Showcase, and a few other series as well. It was a big bastard. Definitely a slow burn, narratively speaking. Many of its ideas do take a while to get going, but it's all worth it in the end. Trust me. Knightfall was a launching off point for the newly debuted villain, Bane, who had just made his first appearance in Batman Vengeance of Bane #1 from January of 1993. Bane was an orphan forced to serve his father's life sentence, born and raised in the Pene Duro prison, located in the fictional Latin American country known as Santa Prisca. It was a literal hell on earth, housing some of the most vile and despicable criminals imaginable. Within the harsh prison environment, Bane had learned to fight and protect himself at a young age, read a lot of books to expand his knowledge, and vigorously exercised to hone his strength and mind. Eventually, Bane would be put through an experimental procedure intended to transform him into a super soldier, which had killed all other previous subjects. The scientists at the prison would inject him with the highly addictive super steroid Venom directly into his brain, which greatly enhanced his strength and stamina. Bane would break out of Pene Duro and travel to Gotham City, hearing of the legend surrounding its protector Batman that used fear to keep the criminals there at bay. Bane saw Gotham City as its own prison in many ways, and having been haunted by the visions of a demonic bat creature ever since he was a child, felt that it was his destiny to destroy Batman and conquer Gotham. Before we fully dive into how Bane broke the bat, we need to set the stage for another one of the main characters introduced during the Knightfall storyline, the vigilante known as Azrael, named after God's Angel of Death. Azrael is a character I have not spoken all that much about on my channel. The Michael Lane version of the character appeared in the Batman Arkham series of games that I have reviewed and done Let's Plays on, but the first version, the one I will be discussing here, is a man by the name of Jean-Paul Valley. Valley is a graduate student from Gotham University who had been subconsciously trained since birth to be an assassin, like his father before him, by a highly secretive religious group formed during the Crusades, called the Order of Saint Dumas. They appoint Azraels to act as taskmasters, who enforce the Order's violent beliefs from the shadows, leading up to the events of Knightfall. Following a brief altercation with Batman, Valley would turn his back on the Order and be taken under the Dark Knight's wing, in the hopes that Azrael would become Gotham's latest watchful guardian. Azrael is a pretty badass character. I love his design, he's got a sick name, and his backstory, while a bit too complex and confusing in areas, is intriguing, with the dark historical elements that are sprinkled into it, surrounding the Crusades. As a fan of history, this sort of stuff gives any character a few extra brownie points in my book. Anyways, let's switch focus back to our buddy Bane and get into the Knightfall Saga itself. Following his escape from Pene Duro, Bane would begin wearing a special outfit, equipped with a venom-dispensing apparatus which pumped the steroid substance directly into his brain through a series of tubes. Due to the procedure performed on him in the prison, Bane would need to administer venom into his body every 12 hours, at the latest, or suffer severe side effects. When Bane arrives in Gotham, he begins to monitor Batman, only making the Caped Crusader aware of his presence a few times, and never fully engaging him. Why? Because Bane knows that Batman could beat him at 100%, so he decides to strategically weaken him first. Bane and his men would lead an assault on Arkham Asylum, destroying several of its walls with rocket launchers and releasing all of its twisted and insane inhabitants. At this time in his life, Batman had been going through a psychological and emotional crisis, finding it very difficult to focus for a variety of reasons. A few of his allies, such as Lucius Fox, had become targets of notorious villains like Roman Sionis, Black Mask. Batman is still coping with the recent loss of his partner Robin, Jason Todd, following the events of the Death in the Family storyline, and one could assume the death of his close friend Clark Kent has also been weighing heavy on Bruce's mind, as Superman's demise had taken place a few short months prior to the start of Knightfall. At several points, you can see Jean-Paul Valley, Robin, and Batman all wearing the commemorative black Superman armbands from that story. When all of Batman's villains were released from Arkham by Bane, it just intensified everything. The Dark Knight would wage war against each of his enemies, one by one, over the course of several months, slowly becoming overwhelmed by them, burning his candle at both ends. And of course, Batman, being Batman, was far too stubborn and prideful to rest, and just carried on. His relationship with the new Robin, Tim Drake, becomes heavily strained, as Batman would much rather prefer to do everything alone, which makes Robin believe that he doesn't even want a partner anymore. In reality, it's just the fear of losing another ally taking hold, something clearly visualized during an encounter Batman has with the Scarecrow, being forced to relive the death of Jason in his mind. After having pushed Batman to his absolute limits, both physically and mentally, with the other members of the Caped Crusaders' Rogues Gallery acting as pawns in this giant chess game of his, Bane would finally make his calculated move against Batman, deducing that his secret identity is that of Bruce Wayne, and proceeds to attack Wayne Manor and break into the Batcave. Batman would try his best to defend his home and stop this intruder, but in his exhausted state, the battle with Bane had been over before it even began. What happened next is depicted in one of my all-time favorite splash pages in comic history, when Bane breaks Batman's back over his knee. After violently crippling his enemy, Bane hoists Batman's body up over his head, high on the rooftops of Gotham Square, and announces himself the new king of Gotham City, before throwing him down to the streets below. This attack, suffered at the hands of Bane, leaves Bruce paralyzed from the waist down. With Batman decommissioned, Bane and his men would quickly take control of Gotham City's criminal underworld. In the following weeks, Bruce desperately tries to rehabilitate himself after such a serious injury, and realizing that it may be permanent, makes the difficult decision to have Jean-Paul Valley, Azrael, take on the mantle of Batman in his absence, to guarantee that Gotham keeps its protector. This decision further weakens the relationship Bruce has with Tim Drake, and rightfully so. Not only does Robin believe Batman's true successor lies in Dick Grayson, the original Robin, now going by Nightwing, but saying that Azrael is essentially the last hope for Gotham severely undermines everything Robin and Nightwing do as a whole, doesn't it? It's a big middle finger to all of the contributions the two of them have made over the years, risking their lives for Batman's cause. It's like they don't even exist in Bruce's eyes. Now, it is revealed in the storyline that Batman had chosen Azrael over Nightwing in order to protect Grayson from Bane, in case he was severely injured or killed if he had chosen to hunt Bane down and avenge Bruce. But then that just makes Azrael seem expendable, doesn't it? Like Bruce doesn't really care about his well-being, willing to throw him out to the wolves as long as Robin and Nightwing are safe. No matter how you look at it, Bruce looks like a complete asshole here. Anywho, choosing Azrael as the new Batman came with its fair share of complications. I mentioned the Order of Saint Dumas earlier, the mysterious religious group who had been brainwashing the mind of Jean-Paul Valley ever since he was a child. Though he did manage to overcome the Order's influence on him after fighting Batman, his mental programming, which was referred to as the system, would become aggravated, so to speak, when, as Batman, Azrael came face to face with the Scarecrow and was hit with the villain's powerful fear gas. As a result, the system would slowly begin to take over Azrael's mind, manipulating his thoughts and actions, and making him hallucinate during his tenure as Batman. Azrael would become mentally unhinged, arrogant, violent, and paranoid. The title of Batman would also go to his head and poison his ego. Over the course of the story, Azrael would quote-unquote upgrade the iconic Batsuit, turning it into a mechanical bastardization, armed to the teeth. It was equipped with sharp-clawed gauntlets, launchable batarangs, retractable grapnel hooks, a light beam that could be fired out of the chest plate, a shielded cape, rocket launchers, a flamethrower, even a machine gun by the end, which blatantly disregards one of Batman's oldest rules: no guns. Before I continue, let's quickly discuss the Knightfall Batsuit for a second. It's definitely a product of its time. It oozes the 1990s, when so many concepts and visuals in comics felt very excessive in their design, but the whole point of it is to be exaggerated, because it is the physical representation of what Jean-Paul Valley's actions have done to the symbol of Batman, tearing it down, polluting it, weaponizing it. His version of the Batsuit is a little absurd, especially looking at it from a modern lens, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't one of my favorites. It's just a badass take on the costume. What can I say? One of the more memorable elements of the entire Knightfall Saga. I even like the earlier version of it, which just features the gauntlets and the fully upgraded red armor we get at the end of the story, but more on that one in a bit. Let's get back to the story. This upgraded Batman armor that Azrael would implement with his crime fighting would allow him to take on and overpower Bane, cutting off his venom supply and beating the villain within an inch of his life. before Bane would be captured and carted away to Blackgate Prison, the last we really see of him in this entire storyline. The new armored batsuit wouldn't help Azrael as much in an encounter against Batman's legendary archenemy, the Joker, though, who poses as a film director at one point in the story, going up against his gang dressed up like movie monsters, saving a girl who crashed through a window made up to look like Robin, getting hit in the face with a bunch of drugged pies. Even though he is victorious in the end, Azrael was clearly not prepared for some of these unorthodox methods. It's kind of funny. Jean-Paul Valley's questionable behavior as Batman would begin to tarnish the Dark Knight's reputation in Gotham. His new Batsuit's deadly arsenal, in combination with his use of excessive force against criminals, would cause the GCPD, specifically Commissioner Gordon, to distrust him, going so far as pointing a gun at Batman and destroying the bat signal. It goes without saying that the citizens of Gotham also started to fear Batman, almost as much as the criminals themselves. With a costume like that, I'd be looking the other way too. Azrael's relationship with Robin would reach a boiling point when Azrael, following a severe hallucination, willingly allowed the serial killer Abattoir to fall to his death, which in turn ensured the death of one of his victims that was being held captive in a hidden torture chamber somewhere in Gotham that could not be found. Robin would come to blows with Azrael, being choked nearly to death by him in the Batcave. Clearly, the man was spiraling out of control, and unfortunately, he was taking Batman's legacy with him, the bastard. While all of this insanity was taking place in Gotham, Bruce Wayne was traveling the world, trying to repair not only his body, but his mind and spirit. His back would be healed in an unnecessarily complicated way, through the telekinetic healing abilities of one Dr. Chandra Kinsolving, a physiotherapist Bruce had fallen in love with, who had been treating his psychological and physical ailments that had been snowballing as Batman, while Bruce was disguised in an attempt to save Chandra from her adoptive brother, Benedict Asp, who had similar psionic powers. He would be hit with a blast of their combined energy, which would slowly repair his back. While I'm not entirely against how Bruce's spine was healed in the comics, I don't think it needed to be as elaborate as it was either. I think having him vigorously train his body through strength and conditioning would have sufficed, and would have been a powerful message to those with spinal cord injuries in real life. You could argue it would have made Bane look like a chump, like he wasn't strong enough to put Batman out for good or something, but having Bruce come back from that sort of debilitating injury would have made him look like $1,000,000, really show his drive and determination overcoming any obstacle put in front of him. Knowing that he would still be in a wheelchair if not for magical powers makes everything feel a lot less impactful than it could have been, but I digress. After seeing Azrael's early results as Batman, Bruce Wayne flirts with the idea of retiring as the Dark Knight permanently. I mean, after all these years, he'd finally be able to sit back, put his feet up, and relax. However, after learning of Azrael's extreme violence and willingness to end a life, both directly and indirectly, he realizes that Azrael must be stopped. Bruce confronts him in the Batcave, demanding that he step down, get off his high horse, but Azrael tells him to go piss up a rope, which I always thought was weird, because it's not like Azrael owns the Batcave or anything. It's below Wayne Manor. It's all Bruce's property, right? Even the toys Azrael has been using are the result of Wayne Enterprises. All he's doing is borrowing them, while he's having all these temper tantrums. Anyways, with Azrael refusing to relinquish the title of Batman, Bruce decides to take it back with force. Before he can challenge Azrael for the heavyweight championship of Gotham City, he must first be retrained in martial arts, having become rusty in his time away. He goes to Lady Shiva, who puts him through a series of tests that improve his speed, reflexes, and overall combat prowess, all while wearing the mask of the bat spirit, Tengu. The final test put in front of him, though, can only be passed by ending a life, which he does. Uh-oh. Don't worry, Bruce has the power of contrivance on his side. Even though he does kill his opponent, it's done by feigning the fatal leopard blow strike, which only makes the recipient look dead, but isn't really. Aha! Now in fighting shape, Bruce returns to Gotham and suits up in his original Batsuit to take on Azrael. Nothing beats the classic. Get that mechanized shit out of here. He goes out into the city with Robin and Nightwing to locate Azrael, and when they do find him, a giant battle at Gotham Narrows Bridge occurs. During the fight, Azrael is covered by helicopter fuel and set on fire by his suit's own flamethrower, falling into the river below and nearly drowning from the weight of his costume. For whatever reason, after he emerges, his suit is now red in color, moving forward, and the comic doesn't explain why at all. Maybe because the metal had been superheated, or because the system had fully taken over his mind, and his visual appearance was made to reflect that? I'm grasping at straws here. Following their battle, Bruce is presumed dead, when a bomb, planted inside of his Batmobile by Azrael, goes off. Nightwing, believing that Bruce had perished, tries to kill Azrael in retaliation, but is defeated and nearly killed himself, if not for the GCPD's arrival. Despite the odds stacked against him, Azrael manages to slip through the hero's fingers and escapes to the Batcave. It's here where he finds a very annoyed and very alive Bruce waiting for him to teach his bitch-ass a lesson once and for all. And this brings us to the final moments of the Knightfall Saga, the epic heavyweight bout between two Batmans, Jean-Paul Valley and Bruce Wayne. Everything that has happened in the storyline up until now has served a single purpose, to strengthen and emphasize the fact that Bruce Wayne is and always has been Batman. Anyone can put on the suit, but not everyone can carry the burden of responsibility that goes along with it. Bruce isn't the only Wayne broken over someone's knee in this storyline, as Azrael snaps the portrait of Bruce's father Thomas before the two begin fighting throughout the manor. Azrael and Batman, the real Batman, move their fight into the Batcave and then the tunnels surrounding it. Bruce knows he's at a disadvantage against Azrael in his specialized suit, so he tricks him into following him through a narrow passageway, forcing Azrael to remove his armor piece by piece. Batman then blinds his foe with sunlight, piercing through the hole Bruce fell down as a child. In a moment of clarity, Valley submits to Bruce, acknowledging that he alone is the Dark Knight. Like I said at the start of this video, Knightfall is an iconic Batman storyline. It effectively chronicles how self-destructive being Batman can be, whether it's due to stubborn pride in the face of insurmountable odds, or in the case of Azrael, a poisoned ego being manipulated by outside forces that are tearing his mind apart. We see two vastly different Batmans on opposite sides of the scale, forced to wage war against each other to determine who truly gets to wear the cowl and protect Gotham City. Though Bane is the primary antagonist of the early stages of this story, Azrael plays the role of the real villain by the end. You do feel a bit of sympathy for him, because his actions are not entirely his own, but that of the systems. Also, Jean-Paul Valley is going through an identity crisis, having given up the role of an Azrael and forced to relinquish the title of Batman back to Bruce Wayne. He feels like he is left with nothing. He is nothing. Despite all of his actions, Bruce does find it in himself to forgive Valley, feeling partly responsible for his mental breakdown, having put so much weight on Valley's shoulders before he was ready. 1993 was the year we saw both of DC's flagship heroes broken and removed from the chessboard, so to speak. In their absences, they would be replaced by newer, modernized versions of themselves, which only seemed to highlight the strengths of the original when they returned in grandiose fashion. Bane and Doomsday were both created to do the same thing, take out their respective heroes, and much like Doomsday, I don't think Bane ever really recovered after such a strong first impression he had made in Knightfall. It's as if every other appearance he has made, at least in the comics, has had a large shadow cast over it. It's like Bane broke himself just as much as he broke the Bat, depreciated his own value and relevance moving forward, never to reach the heights of his debut ever again. The Knightfall Saga as a whole is one of my all-time favorite Batman stories. However, its massive size makes reading it in its entirety a real chore, an overwhelming feat for anyone trying to read it for the first time, and it's definitely its biggest flaw. There is so much filler in this storyline, and as the story progresses past the Knightfall section where Bane breaks Batman's back and Azrael takes over, so much of it feels loosely structured, lacking as much focus. The latter two-thirds of the saga are weaker in this regard, but I don't know, I still find the armored batsuit stuff to be really cool, and the final battle between Azrael and Batman is just so epic, well worth the wait. Maybe I'm biased, but I wouldn't change anything about this story. I accept it for what it is, even if it has a few issues. Well, that's gonna do it for my review of Batman Knightfall. I want to thank you all for watching, and I hope you got something out of this video. If so, please subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon to be notified of all the future content I release on here. I will see you all in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and stay nerdy.